The legal definition of terrorism varies across different jurisdictions, but generally refers to individuals who engage in unlawful violence or intimidation to achieve political, ideological, religious, or social objectives. While the concept of terrorism is globally recognized, the interpretation and application differ significantly based on legal frameworks, security concerns, and political interests. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share for more news and explainers like this. Different governing bodies provide distinct legal definitions of terrorism. In the United Kingdom, the Terrorism Act 2000 outlines terrorism as actions aimed at influencing governments or intimidating the public for political, religious, racial, or ideological causes. This definition includes serious violence, property damage, endangerment to human life, and electronic system disruptions. In the United States, the U.S. Code, Title 18, Section 2331, describes terrorism as violent acts dangerous to human life that violate U.S. laws and are intended to intimidate or coerce civilians, influence government policy, or alter government conduct. Meanwhile, the United Nations does not have a universally agreed definition, but generally describes terrorism as criminal acts intended to provoke terror among the public to serve ideological or political goals. There is no universal consensus on the definition of terrorism. Different nations interpret terrorism based on their legal systems, political perspectives, and security concerns. Some governments label particular groups as terrorists, while others recognize them as freedom fighters or resistance movements. For example, the Palestinian group Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, the European Union, and Israel, while other countries view it as a legitimate political entity that is striving for the freedom of Palestine from its aggressor. There is a key distinction between legal and dictionary definitions of terrorism. The legal definition focuses on specific illegal actions, including violence, coercion, and threats intended to influence governments or intimidate civilians. Meanwhile, the dictionary definition broadly describes a terrorist as someone who uses violence and intimidation for political aims, without necessarily specifying legal violations. This difference in wording can impact how crimes are classified and prosecuted. The term terrorist originates from the French Revolution in the late 18th century, where it was used to describe the Jacobins, a radical political group that employed violence to enforce their rule. The word derived from the French term terroriste, which later evolved to describe individuals or groups using violence to achieve ideological, religious, or political objectives, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. Why are Muslim criminals more often labeled as terrorists? Studies indicate that bias in media and law enforcement results in disproportionate labeling of Muslim criminals as terrorists, while non-Muslim criminals committing similar offenses may be described differently. This discrepancy stems from media framing systemic bias in the justice system and political narratives. Research suggests that crimes committed by Muslims are more likely to be described as terrorism, whereas similar crimes by non-Muslims might be labeled mass shootings or lone wolf attacks. A study on Canadian news coverage found that violent acts by Muslims received 1.5 times more coverage than those by non-Muslims, and thwarted Muslim plots received 5 times more coverage. A study from Goldsmiths, University of London, found that violent acts were more likely to be classified as terrorism when committed by Muslims compared to white non-Muslims. In one experiment, participants rated a Muslim perpetrator's crime as 5.87 out of 7 on a terrorism scale, while a white non-Muslim committing the same crime was rated 3.8 out of 7. Political discourse and national security policies contribute to the association between Islam and terrorism. Additionally, media coverage often links terrorism with migration, reinforcing stereotypes and shaping public perception. Efforts to address media and legal bias are underway. Various initiatives aim to address bias in media reporting and criminal justice systems. Ethical journalism initiatives, for instance, promote balanced and fair reporting to counter stereotypes. Academic research and advocacy groups work to highlight systematic disparities in terrorism classifications. Community engagement and policy reform push for equal treatment under the law, regardless of religion, race, or ethnicity. Combating bias in media and law enforcement requires systemic changes, education, and accountability. Law enforcement practices must be reformed to address implicit bias, ensuring officers receive regular training to recognize and mitigate unconscious prejudices in policing. Strengthening relationships between law enforcement and diverse communities through community policing initiatives can reduce stereotypes and improve trust. Additionally, police departments should publish reports on racial disparities in arrests, searches, and use of force to identify patterns of bias and ensure greater transparency. Media bias plays a significant role in shaping public perception, and addressing this requires balanced reporting practices. Journalists should avoid framing crimes differently based on race or religion, and should ensure that coverage is neutral and objective. Increasing diversity within newsrooms can help challenge biased narratives, as representation in reporting allows for more equitable storytelling. Media watchdog organizations should hold outlets accountable for misleading or biased coverage, and fact-checking mechanisms should be strengthened to prevent the spread of misinformation. Policy and legal reforms must also play a role in addressing systemic bias. Governments need to enforce stronger anti-discrimination laws that prevent racial profiling and biased policing. Establishing independent oversight bodies to investigate complaints of bias in law enforcement can provide accountability and ensure fairness in the application of justice. In addition, legislation against hate speech and misinformation should be refined to tackle harmful stereotypes that contribute to public prejudice. Public awareness and education are crucial in combating bias. Promoting critical media literacy can help individuals recognize bias in news reporting and social media, reducing susceptibility to misleading narratives. Open community dialogues between law enforcement, journalists, and the public can foster understanding and build trust, creating spaces for constructive discussions about fairness and justice. Advocacy and activism further contribute to these efforts by supporting organizations dedicated to fighting racial and religious discrimination and pushing for policies that ensure equal treatment under the law. These approaches require continuous evaluation and active participation from institutions and individuals alike. Addressing bias in media and law enforcement is an ongoing effort that demands collaboration, accountability, and the willingness to challenge ingrained stereotypes. By implementing these changes, societies can work toward a more just and equitable environment. If you haven't already, do subscribe, like, and share for more news and explainers like this.